Hello and welcome to Andrew's Angling. So for those of you who know me, who personally fish with me, know that I often use artificial baits. So plastic baits like maggots, casters, sweet corn and pellets. There are certainly other artificial baits out there. In fact, almost every natural bait you can think of, there's going to be some artificial version. But they're the main ones I tend to fish with any sort of regularity. So today I want to tell you a little bit about how I use them and why I use them. But before that, please remember, when you approach a new lake, whether it's a commercial or some new club lake, always ask if artificial baits are allowed. So why do I use plastic baits? Well, why not just use the real thing? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one for me really is convenience. Once I've set up the rig at home, I can test it in a little jar. So remember, these maggots or casts, whatever they are, these artificial baits, they're usually buoyant and non-buoyant, and by the combination of the two, you can have a bait that just sinks nicely and perfectly sits on the bottom. So once I've tied that up, I test it, I know whatever happens, my bait's going to behave exactly the same way every time I cast out. If I'm using naturals, the real baits, then I have to be a little bit more careful. Every maggot or cast is not going to weigh exactly the same. It's not going to behave exactly the same in the water. The other real important thing, I find that really the main reason I use using artificial baits is that they are small fish proof. So particularly if I'm fishing a water, a small pond that has a lot of roach and rudd in them, then real maggots can get pulled off the hook or the hair, or you can reel in after an hour or two and all you'll be left with is just maggot skin. The little fish would have sucked all the goodness out of the maggots. And this could have happened just a few minutes after casting. You could have been fishing out there for hours without a proper bait. So that's the main reasons I use artificials, and I find that they're very effective for tench and bream. Also, a lot of carp anglers use them, but I don't fish for carp regularly, so I won't concentrate on their use there. But they're fantastic for avoiding the smaller fish. You know you've got a bait out there live when you're fishing. So what baits do I use? So the first one, maggots and casters. I'll lump these two together. So they come in buoyant and non-buoyant, as I said, and I often fish them, just two of them together on a hook in what we call the T-rig. This is fantastic for tench. So usually I'd fish that with some free offerings, so maybe a small patch of small pellets, some hemp, and then if I'm using casters on the hook, I'll use some real casters in my feed. If I'm using maggots, then I may use some dead maggots or live maggots with that also. But the key is I want some free offerings that match the artificial bait that I'm using. So I think what happens is the fish, so the tench usually, or the bream, they'll pick up the stuff in the water, the real ones, and they won't even realize that there's a rubber one there, an artificial one, and they're just picking everything up and they'll suck that in without a thought, and bang, you've got them. The other one I use quite a lot is artificial sweet corn. So there are a couple of ways that I use this. So one, I use it with one floating and one sinking piece of corn, and you might have to cut the floating piece of corn down to the right size for it just to behave in the right way. So again, always test this at home or in the margins. And this I found fantastic for bream. So I'll fish something very similar to what I would with the tench, some pellets, some maggots or casters, hemp, maybe ground bait, but with that as well, I'll always put a few bits of sweet corn, not too much. It's a few bits of sweet corn, so again the bream are going to come in, they're going to be munching away, digging it around, picking up the real pieces of corn, seeing my artificial corn, thinking it's a real one, not even thinking about it, picking it up. Other thing I use these artificial corn for, particularly the buoyant kind, is just as a topper for boilies. So I'll have a boilie, usually a bottom bait, particularly when I'm going for tench, and I'll just put a small buoyant piece of corn, artificial corn, on the top. So this just gives a bit more buoyancy to the bait, it helps take away the weight of the hook, but also it gives just a little bit of sight, something bright on the hook bait. So I like to use quite often fish meal and boilies for tench, and they're often dark brown colours. don't visually stand out very well. But that little fleck of yellow, or whatever colour you want to use, because artificial corn comes in various colours, reds, orange, green, whites, and so on. But something with this little bit of colour, just to give the tench something to focus on. So I found that great when fishing just with boilies or chopped boilies. A little bit of colour on top just makes yours stand out, just that little bit extra. Very good for a bite. So the last one I tend to use with any regularity, pellets. So artificial pellets, again, they come in buoyant and non-buoyant, and by a combination of those you can get your hook bait just sinking on to the bottom perfectly. So one thing I haven't really played around with much is flavouring artificial baits, but one that I have flavoured in the past very successfully for bream and tench are these fake pellets. So what I tend to do is soak them and leave them soaked for as long as you want in salmon oil. So that just gives them a nice sort of gleam, also a nice smell. There's just a little bit added attraction there. And I find they're perfect for using with the method. For example, if you're using the method with pellets, sometimes a brightly coloured bait, that works really, really well with the method. But I find a little bit later in the season, the bites start to slow down, the fish get a little bit more suspicious, a little bit more of a not so standing out bait can work. And that's where artificial pellets for me have really worked well. So I hope that's interesting for you. Give it a go. And I'll say that fishing with artificials, it is a confidence thing. So the first few times I tried them, I think it was the casters were the first ones. First few casts, the first session, it's a bit nerve-wracking, but gotta get your mindset right, try it. Once you've had a couple of fish, all the doubts will go. You'll never look back and you'll use them a lot. So I don't use them all the time, but they're certainly an important part of my armoury when it comes to targeting tench and bream. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Please like, subscribe and comment below.